Okay, I'm sorry, we forgot to hit the record button.
That's okay. No
So
worries.
we can send the link back out to everyone to review it.
Okay.
So, okay, I will send the controls back to Anne. And sorry about that.
That's okay. So we're good now. Can you see the full screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So just previously we looked at Lizard Island, which is a fringing coral reef. So you can access the reef immediately off your own private beach, as people are doing here. Or you can go to an island resort such as Hayman Island, where you would access the reef by boat or by helicopter. Pristine white beaches, such as here in the Whitsunday region, which is a very well-known and popular boating area. And then remote outback areas such as Mount Mulligan, which is also a working cattle station with varied activities for guests. There are many huge cattle stations or ranches in Australia, and one in South Australia is actually larger than Israel. Coming down now to New South Wales, and Sydney, which is the capital city, is typically where most overseas visitors will arrive. And if you are flying from Sydney to Melbourne, it's a 1.5 hour flight. From Sydney to Hobart in Tasmania, it's 2 hours. And similarly, going across to Adelaide in South Australia, it's a 2 hour flight. If you are then crossing the continent and going from Sydney over to Perth, that will be a 5 hour flight. New South Wales has endless beaches and bushland. The city is actually surrounded by bushland. It's a very sophisticated dining scene. We have big ski areas in New South Wales as well, which you probably don't think of at all when you're thinking of Australia. Sydney is a vibrant and very cosmopolitan city, and the life really revolves around the harbour. And I think from this photo here, you can get a sense of how people are literally living all around the harbour in the little bays and inlets that go for miles. And you cross the harbour by ferry, so very easy way to sort of, get back and forth to different parts of the city. You'll definitely find 4 seasons in Sydney, but we have a very mild winter. I think probably the coldest it might get in the evening is around 40 degrees and relatively mild days, especially compared to yours in Michigan. And as I mentioned, the city is literally surrounded by national parks and bushland. One of my favorite things to do is to really enjoy the harbour from a boat. Whether it's a yacht here or a motorboat or one of the ferries, which you can see in the background, the yellow and green boat kind of closer to the harbour bridge. Those are the Sydney ferries, which literally you can transport yourself all around the city by ferry. And it's just a lovely way to really understand the city. Or taking a seaplane outside the city to explore other areas, stopping for lunch then at a well-regarded restaurant, before enjoying a panoramic overview of the city on your return back in the afternoon. And of course, attending a performance at one of the many cultural venues. In March and April, opera is performed on the harbour, where there's a massive platform set as a stage in the water. And then you have the harbour bridge and the opera house as a background. And then in January and February, this same area is used to watch first premiere movies. So the movie screen literally rises out of the harbour and you're sitting outside watching first run movies. The Blue Mountains is an 1.5 hours from the city. It's quite a dramatic area, ideal for walks, just enjoying the scenery, afternoon tea at one of the Art Deco cafes, or high tea at the iconic historical Hydro Majestic Hotel is actually fun to do as well. And occasionally in the winter months, so that would be June, July, and August, there may be light snow flurries here in the Blue Mountains. The oldest wine region in New South Wales is the Hunter Valley, and that's a 2-hour drive from Sydney. Really easy day trip to enjoy the wines of the region, which is particularly well known for Semillon, or it's also ideal for an overnight stay because you've got great accommodation options here as well, and just a 2-hour drive to go back to Sydney. Coming down now to the tiny little bit state at the bottom of the mainland of Australia is Victoria, the Garden State, where definitely the winters will be cooler than those in Sydney because you are coming further south, but still nothing like Michigan winters. This is a state that's known for its, again, its wines, its famed coastal drives. It hosts all the major sporting events, such as the Australian Open in January. And it has charming small villages as well, just with easy access to Melbourne. Melbourne is the capital city, and it's known as the cultural and the fashion capital of Australia. It's one of the few cities where you can enjoy a hot air balloon ride over the city. There are excellent walking tours here, whether the focus would be on art, on architecture, history, culinary aspects, or anything that's tailored to your personal preference. There is a very strong Jewish heritage in Melbourne, and the Jewish Museum of Australia is an excellent place to visit and include on one of your experiences there. Melbourne's very much known for its hidden secrets, its laneways filled with quirky coffee shops, street art, and then arcades. The Block Arcade here, which is similar to an arcade that you would see in London. And then in very close proximity to Melbourne, about an hour outside the city, are different wine regions, the Yarra Valley, or here, the Mornington Peninsula, which is known for its boutique vineyards, such as here at Jackalope, and very much known for its farm-to-table experiences. So great cooking schools down here and all kinds of sort of culinary aspects that you can focus on here if you're interested. And then the famous coastal drive, the Great Ocean Road, which has stunning ocean views on one side and bushland on the other. And this can be driven or explored by air. Coming down now to the island state, which is separate from mainland Australia. It's probably my favorite state of all, even though I grew up in Sydney, and it has a really strong history, vast wilderness areas, lovely mountain areas, and this excellent small-scale production of food, wine, and spirits. And this is truly a state where you can reconnect with nature, wildlife, and your taste buds. The water surrounding the state is cool, no pollution, so the quality of all the food and the wine that's produced here is just excellent. Hobart is the capital city. It has a very strong maritime heritage. And the winters here, because you are further south, will definitely be cooler with snow in the highest mountain areas. I was last in Hobart in July a couple of years ago, and although it was cold, there was only snow on the very top of Mount Wellington. And I was actually traveling with people from New York, and they thought that it was like spring in New York. So whereas I, coming from Florida, thought it was a little bit cooler. There are beautiful old Georgian buildings along the waterfront, which house art galleries, shops, and restaurants. And outside here, every Saturday, the Salamanca markets are held, which represent artists, designers, and producers. And Tasmania not only produces excellent cool climate wines, but also world-class whiskey. And it has won the top award in London. So as well as winery estates, you also have distilleries to visit when you're in Tasmania. Port Arthur is a former convict settlement. It's where the British sent people who had committed a crime in London or in England. It could have been as minor as stealing a piece of ribbon or a loaf of bread. And they were sent to this very, very harsh penal colony. It's now one of the most prominent heritage areas in the country and has an excellent state-of-the-art open-air museum. Wineglass Bay in Freycinet National Park has been named as one of the 10 most beautiful beaches in the world. And around the state, you have stunning coastal scenery where you can take a short 3-hour cruise to encounter local wildlife and just enjoy the spectacular scenery. There are also charming small country villages such as Richmond, where you have a real sense of colonial history from the early British settlements with lovely old sandstone buildings. Coming now to South Australia, a very different state from Tasmania, and it's known as the Wow State for its wine, the outback, and its wildlife. You'll find that in the southern part of the state near Adelaide, the capital city, that there is a Mediterranean climate, but yet in the northern part of the state, when you're closer to the Northern Territory, you'll find a very hot, dry climate. And you might notice on the map under the word South Australia, Coober Pedy, this is a really very unusual area where I think 90% of the world's opals are mined. And a lot of people choose to live underground here, in part because of the intense heat during the summer months. There are 18 wine regions to choose from in South Australia, and the Barossa Valley is probably the most well-known. It was settled by people fleeing religious persecution in Europe, and today it has still retained a lovely European feel, which is shown in many of the buildings, as well as bakeries, sausage makers, and different artisans. Jacobs Creek, which is one of the well-known vineyards in the heart of the Barossa, is known for its double-barrel red wines, which are aged in whiskey barrels to build additional layers of complexity. And you can enjoy breakfast with the kangaroos when you're staying in the Barossa Valley. So a champagne breakfast while you're watching the kangaroos. One of the best places to see wildlife is on Kangaroo Island, which is a beautiful, pristine island, a 30-minute flight from Adelaide, which, as I mentioned, is the capital city of South Australia. It is really the best place to see animals in their natural habitat. All of the sightseeing is done in a 4-wheel drive, and you encounter the animals as they're actually meant to be seen in their natural habitat. It's a very relaxed experience, and you generally stop for barbecue lunch in the bush. As well as all of the native animals that you'd expect to see, which are very much unique to Australia and not seen anywhere else. You can walk on the beach with your guide amongst the Australian sea lions as they come out of the water after they've been at sea feeding for many, many days. And then they come up on the beach to rest, and you can just sort of walk around in between with the sea lions. And the outback of South Australia is really a vast land of red dirt here in the Flinders Ranges, grassy plains, rugged hills and waterholes, and definitely 4-wheel drive sightseeing is the best way to explore this region. Coming now over to Western Australia, which is a huge state. It's 3.5 times as big as Texas. And as I mentioned earlier, if you were flying from Sydney coming over to Perth, which is the capital city of Western Australia, it's about a 5-hour flight. So it's similar to flying from New York to California or Miami to Los Angeles. In the southwest part of the state, down near the capital city, it's a very temperate climate, and Perth actually, as a city, has the highest recorded sunshine in the country of any of the capital cities. But if you were to go further north, to the very far north of the state, it's very tropical, and the dry season from April to November would be the ideal time to visit this northern part of the state. Much of the area would be not accessible in the wet season. Wildflowers are prolific throughout Western Australia, and in Perth at Kings Park and the Botanical Gardens, there are lovely displays as well. And July through November would be the best viewing months. Perth is also the starting point for the Indian Pacific, which is one of the two iconic rail journeys that we have in Australia. The Indian Pacific crosses the continent from Perth to Sydney, or from Sydney back to Perth, and it's a 4-day, 3-night trip. And the other iconic rail journey that we have is called the Ghan, which is named after the old Afghan camel drivers, which goes from Adelaide up to Darwin through Alice Springs. And coming about 3 hours south of Perth, you have the beautiful Margaret River wine region. It's absolutely lovely, lovely area, boutique vineyards, and it's, I think, rather unusual in that it runs parallel to a stunning coastline. Typically, you're not seeing wine regions that have a stunning coastline next to it. You'll find here award-winning wineries and restaurants, long sandy beaches, tall timber forests with the giant kauri trees, and ancient caves. So lots of activities to do in this area apart from enjoying the local wine. And there are lots of artisans as well, whether it's cheese, chocolate makers, olive oils, etc., in the Margaret River region. And then if you continued about 800 miles north of Perth, you would come to the Ningaloo Reef, which is the world's longest fringing coral reef, where you can snorkel directly off the beach. And you can swim here with the big three. So you can swim with the whale shark between March and July. You can also swim with the humpback whale between July and October. And then the manta rays, you can swim with those year round. And then coming even further north, up into the northern part of the state, you have the Kimberley region, which is described as the last frontier. Much of it is completely uninhabited, with very rare geological formations here, such as the Bungle Bungles. In this region, you'll also find Broome, which is famous for the beautiful South Seas pearls. And then the Argyle Diamond Mine, unfortunately, it was where 90% of the world's rare pink diamonds were mined, closed at the end of last year. And then you've got a wonderful expedition cruising option on a ship called the True North. It carries 36 passengers, and the ship has its own Zodiacs and its own helicopter, so that guests can have a really immersive and interactive experience in this region. The Northern Territory is unlike any other place. The flight from Sydney up to Darwin is 4.5 hours, and Sydney to Uluru, which many of you might know as Ayers Rock, is actually a 3-hour and 15-minute flight. So the Northern Territory is known for its rich red outback, its crystal clear waterholes, and its ancient Aboriginal culture. The top end of the state it's affectionately called the top end, is actually closer to Indonesia than to the vast majority of Australia, and very definite wet season here, as I mentioned, between probably November till April, with very, very hot temperatures. But here you'll find vast unspoiled wilderness, such as at Kakadu National Park, which is renowned for its beauty, its cultural significance, and its wildlife. And it is actually the country's largest national park. Huge wetland areas here as well, with prolific bird life, and it's home to about 1/3 of Australia's bird species. Outside Darwin, you have a really interesting safari lodge called Bamaroo Plains, which where you can actually experience a profusion of bird life and wildlife. And an airboat safari here is quite an exhilarating experience. The lodge operates between May through October, so in the drier season. In March and April, it does operate as a fishing lodge, and wonderful for, opportunities for keen photographers in this region as well. And then in the very red centre of Australia, and in the southern part of the Northern Territory, you have Uluru, which was known as Ayers Rock. It's often considered the spiritual centre of the country, and it's of great significance to the Aboriginal people. Very hot, dry summers here, and I think the best time of the year to visit is between March through November. As you're in the desert during the winter months, June, July, and August, the temperatures during the day would be very pleasant, but it could be cooler at night. The Field of Light at Uluru is a light installation by the British artist Bruce Monroe, which has 50,000 individual spheres of light. It's become so popular that it has been indefinitely extended. Another popular experience here at Uluru would be the Sounds of Silence dinner, where you have dinner in the quiet of the desert outside, under the stars of the Southern Hemisphere, and you would usually be joined by an astronomer. And then finally, our capital, the Australian Capital Territory, which is an entirely planned city. It has quite a small town vibe, and you can see it's located in part of New South Wales, but it's known as a separate territory, so the Australian Capital Territory. And this is our federal capital with Parliament House, the building that's in the background with the spire. The low white building in the foreground is our old Parliament House. The city was designed by an American architect, Walter Burley Griffin, who won a competition for the design. And the city is very much home to our national treasures, as well as obviously being the seat of Parliament. You can really experience the rich and diverse stories of what has made Australia, and these can be viewed through the collections across the city's museums and art galleries. The Australian War Memorial here, which is very significant to the Australian people. And this is the National Gallery. At the National Portrait Gallery, you can actually learn the history of the country through portraits. And Floriade is the biggest celebration of spring. It's usually held each September in Canberra. And Canberra is also the other Australian city where you can enjoy a hot air balloon flight over the city, and you can actually get a really good sense of how the urban and the green spaces of the national parks that surround the city are integrated. So that's a quick look at our states and territories. And now just to show you that we have a number of quite significant UNESCO World Heritage sites in Australia, and they're designated as World Heritage because of their natural beauty and or their cultural significance. And some of these would include the Greater Blue Mountains area, which, as I mentioned, is just about an hour and a half from Sydney. The Sydney Opera House, you can visit the Opera House in many different ways. You can do a behind the scenes tour, you can do a regular guided tour, you can also combine a tour of the centre in one of the suburbs where all of the costumes and a lot of the sets are kept for the different venues at the Opera House, and then come into the Opera House to see then the actual performance areas. Kakadu National Park in the top end, which, as I mentioned, has particularly a lot of Aboriginal significance. And then Lord Howe Island, which you may not be as aware of. It's a stunning, stunning island. It's a direct 2-hour flight from Sydney. There are only 400 visitors at any one time allowed on the island. Very few people have cars. It's a little bit like going back in time, but absolutely an idyllic place to visit. It's also the southernmost coral reef, so it's absolutely ideal for diving and snorkeling. and it's not impacted by the weather that perhaps the Great Barrier Reef may feel during the summer months. And then, of course, Uluru in the red center, the Great Barrier Reef, and then Port Arthur in Tasmania. We have a selection of what are called signature experiences in Australia, which represent the essence of Australia. And these are divided into different categories. Wildlife journeys would be one of them. And this is where you can interact with some of our animals, which are not found anywhere else in the world. This is a tiny member of the kangaroo family, a wallaby, and of course, koalas. There are 3 states where you can actually hold a koala, and they would be South Australia, Western Australia, and Queensland. So in most other states, you're not allowed to actually physically hold a koala. And then kangaroos and the joey going into the mother's pouch, wombats, and then the flightless birds, similar, I suppose, to an ostrich that you'd see in South Africa, the emus. And each evening on Phillip Island, the little penguins come ashore. A host of cultural attractions to enjoy in Australia. This is actually the Australian Ballet performing at a resort in the Great Barrier Reef. You can, of course, see ballet, theatre in any of our major cities. The Australian Chamber Orchestra is highly regarded, and each city has its own symphony orchestra. Other cultural attractions can include visiting the laneways of Melbourne, where graffiti street art is very, very much encouraged by the government. And the laneways have individual themes. This one is actually themed on musicians. Or you can explore ancient rock art in the Northern Territory or Western Australia, which has been in existence for over 50,000 years. Attend a performance at the Sydney Opera House. This is the concert hall, which is just one of 7 different venues at the Opera House. So there's the Opera Theatre, the Joan Sutherland Theatre, the concert hall, the drama theatre, the playhouse, the studio. So just lots of different venues where different concerts could be happening at any one night. Our Parliament House, which each section of the building is very symbolic to the Australian people. It's been designed with specific purposes, and the main entrance here with its sort of open, all-embracing sides was designed to invite people into the building to observe the democratic process. And then the fascinating, if rather controversial, Museum of Old and New Art in Tasmania. This is 15 minutes from Hobart, the capital city, and for any art enthusiast, definitely worth visiting. And there are opportunities to spend time with an Indigenous guide to learn about the country from an Aboriginal perspective as opposed to a European perspective. And these can be done in many, many different areas of Australia and for different lengths of time. So this is just a walking tour in the Royal Botanical Gardens in Melbourne. Or you can spend time with an Indigenous guide in the rainforest in Queensland to learn how plants and seeds are used by the Aboriginal people for food and medicine. Or visiting an Aboriginal art centre. Ernabella Arts is a very, very well-known art centre in South Australia, or a local gallery. Aboriginal art has in recent years become very much a collector's item. And because we have miles of coastlines, endless rivers and lakes and streams, there are really excellent fishing opportunities, whether it's the big game fishermen, the trout fishermen, freshwater fishermen. So lots of interesting fishing options, as well as golf. If you enjoy playing golf, we can certainly arrange tee times at one of the 7 golf courses, which are ranked in the top 100 in the world, which would include Royal Melbourne. And we have a series of 12 multi-day guided walks, which are throughout the country to explore both inland and coastal regions. And these are usually 3 or 4 days in length. And of course, the ultimate winery experiences. I think Australia is quite well known for its wine. We have wine regions in New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia. Each of them, I think each wine region has quite a different feel. This is the Yarra Valley, which is just an hour outside Melbourne. And over here in South Australia, which has 3 major wine regions, the Barossa Valley, the Clare Valley, and McLaren Vale. This is the Darrenberg Cube, which is a very unusual tasting room, which also houses a Salvador Dali art exhibit. And winery visits are very much personalized to meet with each individual's personal preferences. In the Barossa Valley at Seppeltsfield, you can taste a port from the year of your birth. And there are excellent cooking classes in most of the wine regions as well. Australia has lots of farm to table, paddock to plate opportunities in different parts of the country. We also have a network of accommodation, which is known as the Luxury Lodges of Australia. And this is Cape Lodge in the Margaret River, just outside Perth. Each lodge is located in a distinctly different part of the country, and it offers a wide variety of experiences which are unique to that particular area. So you very much have a sense of place when you're staying at one of these lodges. This is Longitude 131, which is the luxury tented camp with the closest access to Uluru. Sapphire Freycinet in Tasmania, which overlooks Coles Bay, and the Hazards, which are the pink granite rocks behind the lodge, or in front of the lodge, actually. And then the Lake House, which is just outside Melbourne, about an hour outside Melbourne, in a charming country area. And the owner here is a well-known chef who has taught at the James Beard Cooking School in New York. So they very much pride themselves on sourcing everything locally. So everything that's served in the restaurant would be served locally and seasonally. And Emirates' one and only Walgan Valley, which is a 3-hour drive from Sydney or a 90-minute helicopter flight. This to me really captures the essence of Australian country life. It's just a really delightful place. And Qualia, which is on Hamilton Island in Queensland, up in the Barrier Reef, the lower Barrier Reef area. So you can really get a sense of the very different areas where some of these lodges are located, and we've just looked at a few of them. We do have a really strong, vibrant gourmet scene, and our restaurants are rated not by Michelin stars, but by chef's hats. And Bray, which is just off the Great Ocean Road, it's about an hour and a half from Melbourne, has 3 chef's hats, which is the maximum that can be given. It's also been named as one of the 50 best restaurants in the world. And one of my favorites in Sydney is Icebergs Dining at Bondi Beach. Lovely place to have lunch on a summer day or a sunny day. And actually I was last there in the winter and it was a beautiful day. And we're just sitting having lunch and looking at the dolphins just playing in the ocean below us. It was just really quite special. And this is a living table at the Source, which is the fine dining restaurant at Mona, the Museum of Old and New Art in Tasmania. Another unusual experience when you are in Tasmania is to put on waders and to go out into the marine farm at Freycinet to have freshly shucked oysters and cool climate wines. I actually don't eat oysters, but I love this experience, just putting on the waders and going out into the marine farm. And then I certainly was able to enjoy the local wine. So I think in summary, when you visit Australia, you'll find a very, very relaxed lifestyle, very friendly people. It's definitely a land of great contrast with unique wildlife that you're not going to see anywhere else in the world, and a very interesting fusion cuisine that you can enjoy with world-class local wines. And thank you for joining the Australian journey.
Okay, thank you, Anne. I know you took us through the entire country in less than 40 minutes, so that was pretty impressive. It's a lot to see and do, and I know there's more that we could talk about. We want to try to keep it somewhat limited in time. You know, like you said, it's sort of like traveling the United States, trying to come to America and see the entire country in one trip. It's extremely
Exactly.
difficult.
Yeah, yeah.
So a couple of the questions
And we
that
all know
did come
people
in,
know they can't.
we're just in that timeline. How long would a typical trip be? How long should we plan on making the journey? And the taboo question also came in. Can I combine it with New Zealand?
As an Australian, I'll say no. No, of course you can, but I do think you need ample time to do that. New Zealand is an absolutely stunningly beautiful country, but it's very different from Australia. It's quite small. It's about the size of the state of Colorado. And you're going to New Zealand, I think, for different reasons. I think you need to allow yourself at least 3 weeks if you are trying to combine Australia and New Zealand, and you would then determine that you're only going to see part of Australia. And most people going to Australia and not ever planning to see the entire country. They're selecting the parts of the country that are of most interest to them, and focusing on those regions. And also, I think weather has to be taken into consideration. I know that for those of you living in Michigan, to escape the winters in Michigan is something that you often like to do, but you need to be aware that in the very far north of Australia, that is the hottest part of the year in our summer months, given that the seasons are reversed. So I think if you were just planning on visiting Australia 2 weeks, but you would then be selecting what you really wanted to experience.
Okay. Kangaroo Island, is Southern Ocean Lodge opened?
No, it's not. Southern Ocean Lodge is being rebuilt as we speak, and it will be reopened in 2023. There are other options to stay on Kangaroo Island, but not obviously of the same ilk as perhaps Southern Ocean Lodge, which was exceptional and one of the luxury lodges of Australia.
Okay, so with that said, is there another luxury property on the islands?
There are properties that I don't think would be classified quite to the same level of luxury as Southern Ocean Lodge was, but certainly there are properties where you can be very comfortable, but
Okay.
not considered to be one of the luxury lodges of Australia.
Okay, thank you. And then it appears that every state has a different ideal weather timeline. Is there a specific time of year that you would say would be the best in a general sense of moving state to state to get the best of the temperatures?
I personally think that the spring, so March, April, May in Australia, and then oh, sorry, I'm getting myself reversed here. That's our autumn.
Florida weather.
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm in Florida. So in March, April, May, which is our autumn, or spring, September, October, November, are absolutely ideal months. I mean, lots of people love traveling in the summer months, December, January, and February, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it's ideal in many parts of the country. You just have to know that that is summer. It's also when local people and local universities are on holidays. It's also the most expensive time of the year to travel. Australia can actually be a year-round destination, but my personal recommendation would be, if possible, ideal times would be spring and fall.
Okay. And back to Kangaroo Island, how did the fires affect the animals? Is
There,
there prevalent and a lot of animals to be seen and are they active?
yes, they are. The fires affected one part of the island where Southern Ocean Lodge actually was located. So the island is a really large area. The animals definitely are to be seen, as they would have been. And also, because the bush regenerates very quickly, that's what's happening. You know, there's new growth that happened almost immediately after the fires. That's typical in a bush area like that. But yeah, I don't think you shouldn't have any concerns at all about visiting Kangaroo Island now. You can still see the same native animals that you would normally see, and as they're meant to be seen, kind of really just in the bush.
Okay. And the True North cruise, is that what are the durations of those sailings?
You know, I'd have to really double check that. I think they're probably, 2 weeks. They are a member of the luxury lodges, and they would only be operating in the dry season as well. So they would not be operating in the wet season in that northern part, because they operate from Broome going up into the Kimberley region. So they would only be operating in the dry season.
Okay. And I think that's all we have for questions. If there's any other question, please throw it in the chat room. I don't know if Rochelle, you wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually, first of all, I want to thank Anne for an excellent presentation. I've been to Australia twice, and I was so excited when I saw your presentation. I really could go back again. There's so much more to see. But it's a lovely country with really fascinating experiences and wonderful, warm people. So you can't go wrong. It's just a long plane ride, that's all. But other than that, it's perfect. I just want to thank everybody for being on our webinar tonight, for joining us. And many of you I know have joined you on our past ones. And thank you again for supporting us. And next month, actually, Anne will be back with us in October to do New Zealand. So then you can get a comparison of how you can put your trip together. We just felt it was too much to do in one webinar. So Anne has graciously offered to present again next month. So I hope you'll join us, and let's keep our eye on the travel bug. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.